The only mechanic who could fix it was days away. Then, a truck full of German prisoners of war rolled onto the property. One of them, a quiet young man barely in his 20s, stepped forward with a strange, simple request. "Give me wire." The farmer thought it was absurd. The guard thought it was a waste of time. But what that prisoner did next didn't just repair the pump. It salvaged an entire farm, rescued a family's future, and fundamentally altered one man's understanding of the enemy forever. Stay with this story until the very end, because the twist in its final moments reveals a deeper truth about humanity than any history book could ever hope to capture. A Texas farm in dire straits. By the mid-1940s, the vast, sun-baked farms of Texas were drowning in a crisis not of water, but of acute human absence. With a significant portion of America's young men deployed across oceans in the theaters of World War II, the home front faced a crushing labor deficit. Fields of cotton, maize, and vegetables lay fallow, their bounty unpicked. Machinery, overworked and undermaintained, succumbed to breakdowns. For many farming families, the specter of total crop failure, and financial ruin, loomed as large and oppressive as the Texas summer sun. The government solution was as pragmatic as it was controversial: the deployment of German prisoners of war as agricultural laborers. Across the heartland, POW camps sprang up, and detachments of captured German soldiers were dispatched to work on American farms. For many Texans, the arrival of these men in their distinctive uniforms stirred a complex cauldron of emotions. There was raw, understandable hostility. These were, after all, soldiers of the Third Reich, the enemy whose ideologies and actions had propelled the world into conflict. For others, practicality overrode principle, desperation for hands to bring in the harvest muted other considerations. And some held a more nuanced view, understanding that many of these young soldiers were conscripts, caught in the gears of a monstrous machine, simply following orders as their own lives were upended. One particular farmer, whom history would record only as a man of grit and sun-leathered skin, embodied this crisis. He was exhausted, mentally and physically. Weeks behind schedule, he stood at the edge of his land, watching the relentless sun transform the rich, dark soil of his fields into a cracked, brittle tapestry of brown. His lifeline, an irrigation pump that drew vital water from a deep well, had sputtered, coughed, and fallen silent. Without it, his entire crop, the product of a year's planning and toil, would be dead within days. His usual network of help had evaporated, the local mechanic was overbooked and days away. He was isolated, out of options, and staring into the abyss of loss.so when the dusty military truck rumbled up his long drive, kicking up a plume of red dust. He did not feel the relief of reinforcement. Instead, a wave of frustration and a cold flicker of fear washed over him. Here was a reminder of the war he wished would just leave his farm be, embodied in the form of the enemy himself, arriving at his moment of greatest vulnerability, the silent breakdown. The German prisoners disembarked under the watchful, albeit solitary, eye of an American guard. They were a varied group, but among them was one who stood out for his stillness. He was young, likely not yet 25, with an air of quiet focus that contrasted with the weary uncertainty of his comrades. His eyes were calm, taking in the farm, the wilting crops, and the despair etched on the farmer's face. As the farmer, his voice tinged with defeat, explained the pump's failure, its sudden silence, the dry channels, the young German listened intently. When the farmer finished, the prisoner, in halting but understandable English, asked if he might examine the machine. The farmer hesitated, his distrust a palpable wall. This was the enemy, a man whose nation was at war with his own. Letting him near crucial equipment felt like a risk bordering on folly. Yet, as he stood there, the parched earth seeming to crack louder underfoot, desperation made the decision for him. With a curt nod, he led the young man to the pump house. The German prisoner knelt beside the ailing machine. He did not rush. With a practiced ear, he listened to the farmer's description again, then began a meticulous visual inspection. His hands, though calloused, moved with a delicate precision over the pump's motor and its electrical components. After a few minutes, he found the heart of the problem, the electrical wiring. The insulation was badly cracked and frayed, victims of heat, age, and neglect. The connections were weak, causing a faltering current that was too feeble to engage the motor properly. It was a death by 1,000 cuts for the electrical system that he stood up, brushed the dust from his knees, and looked directly at the farmer. He said one word, "Wire." The farmer blinked, certain he had misheard. "Wire? That's it? You think a piece of wire is going to fix this?" The German nodded, his expression unchanged, a quiet confidence in his eyes. The farmer muttered under his breath, a colorful invective about foolish ideas and wasted time. The guard shifted his weight, equally skeptical. But with no alternative presenting itself, the farmer stomped off to a nearby shed and returned with a coiled length of old, discarded fence wire, rough, rusted in spots, and seemingly useless for such a delicate task. The ingenious, silly wire trick. What happened next was a lesson in resourceful engineering. The young prisoner did not have a proper toolkit. Instead, from his pocket, he produced a small, handmade tool fashioned from a scrap of metal, a personal implement likely crafted during long hours in the camp. With this, he set to work on the old fence wire. First, he carefully stripped away the worst of the corrosion and the compromised insulation. Then, with the focus of a surgeon, he began to wrap the bare copper strands around the pump's failing connection points. He worked not with brute force, but with an intuitive understanding of conductivity and tension. He created a series of tight, secure bonds, reinforcing weak junctures and bridging gaps where the original wiring had failed. He stabilized the entire pathway for the electrical current, constructing a makeshift but remarkably robust conductive network. To the farmer and the guard, it began to look less like a repair and more like a strange, abstract metal sculpture grafted onto the pump. The farmer watched, his arms crossed, his disbelief hardening into certainty that this was all a farce. "That's not how you fix a pump, son," he grumbled, his Texan drawl thick with skepticism. "That's a good way to blow the whole thing to kingdom come and take us with it." The German prisoner did not respond. He remained utterly absorbed in his task, his fingers twisting and securing the wire with a stubborn, silent ingenuity. When he finally finished, he stepped back, wiped his hands on his trousers, and gestured for the farmer to try the starter. With a sigh of profound resignation, the farmer reached for the pump's pull cord. He gave it a forceful yank. The machine coughed, a dry, sick sound. He pulled again. This time, it shuddered, a metallic groan echoing in the small pump house. On the third pull, with a sound like a thunderclap of life, the pump roared into action. A seed of understanding takes root. News, in rural communities, travels with the wind. Soon, neighbors came by, drawn by the tale of the miracle fix performed by the German POW. They gathered around the pump, some laughing at the rustic repair, others shaking their heads in wonder. But the consensus was unanimous: the young German knew his business. For the farmer, this event triggered a profound and almost immediate shift in perspective. The label of enemy began to peel away, revealing the individual beneath. The next day, he brought the young prisoner an extra canteen of cool water. He made a point of letting him rest in the shade of a large oak during the hottest part of the afternoon. The transactions of the farm began to be punctuated by tentative, human conversation that he learned that the young man's name was Karl. Before the war, in a small village far from the horrors of the Eastern Front or the Normandy coast, Karl had been an apprentice electrician. He had repaired radios for families, motors for local businesses, and equipment for farms much like this one. The war had conscripted him, torn him from his trade and his home, and deposited him onto a Texas farm as a prisoner. His skills, however, remained neutral, apolitical tools of understanding and repair. As Karl spoke softly of his home and his family, the farmer's mental image of a faceless Nazi soldier dissolved. In its place stood a young man with talent, with memories, with a past and, hopefully, a future. He saw a worker, a craftsman, a person of dignity who had been, as he later reflected, in the wrong place at the wrong time, like so many boys are. And Karl, in turn, saw something that contradicted the propaganda he had been fed. He saw that this American was not a monstrous caricature, but a weary father and husband fighting his own battle for survival on the land. He saw patience, eventually, gratitude, and a shared language of hard work and mechanical respect that transcended national divisions. The harvest secured, a bond forged. With the pump restored, life returned to the fields. The crops, once teetering on the brink, drank deeply and revived. The farm was pulled back from the precipice. Karl, now valued for his clear aptitude, was assigned more regularly to the farmer's property. He moved beyond the pump, fixing broken tractors, patching harnesses, and jury-rigging solutions for a dozen small breakdowns. He shared little tricks, a better way to splice a rope, a method to sharpen a blade longer, a tip for aligning a crooked wheel. The farmer later confessed that in those few weeks, Karl had contributed more tangible, ingenious help than some seasonal hired hands had managed in years. The inevitable transfer order for Karl's POW work unit eventually arrived. On the day of departure, as the prisoners loaded back onto the truck, the farmer sought out Karl. He extended his hand, a firm, calloused grip meant for equals. He looked the young German in the eye and said, simply and sincerely, "Thank you for saving my livelihood." The guard overseeing the loading later remarked that in all his duties, he had never seen a Texan shake a German soldier's hand with such unambiguous respect, the lasting echo of a simple fix. The war ended. Prisoners returned home. Life moved on. But for decades after, the farmer would tell this story. He did not frame it as a war story, nor really a story about prisoners. It was, to him, a story about a moment of unexpected grace and brilliant ingenuity. He called it the tale of that silly German wire trick. But it was never silly. It was a profound metaphor. In the midst of a global cataclysm built on hatred and division, on a small patch of Texas soil, a simple coil of wire became a conduit for something else entirely. It conducted not just electricity, but skill, mutual need, and ultimately, recognition. It was a tangible reminder that humanity with its capacity for kindness, craftsmanship, and connection can persist in the most unlikely places, between the most unlikely people. It proved that even across the vast chasm of conflict, one person's competence and another's willingness to see it can change everything. This narrative is inspired by true accounts from the World War II home front, drawing from sources like oral histories, archival collections such as those documenting Germans in the orchards, and memoirs that detail the daily interactions between German POWs and American farmers. These records are replete with instances of shared labor, quiet respect, and the unexpected friendships forged not on battlefields, but in farmyards, proving that sometimes, all it takes to bridge a world of difference is a willingness to hand someone a piece of wire, and to watch, with an open mind, what they can build with it. The true twist of this story is not a plot device, but a quiet revelation, that our common ground is often found not in grand ideologies, but in the shared, practical struggles of keeping the world working, and in the silent language of help offered and accepted. Do you agree that these moments of simple, human connection hold the most powerful lessons of all?